Okay, I think we'll get started. Hello everyone, I'm Mike. Today we're going to be looking at rolling up some character sheets. I've got Roll20 open on the left here, and we're using it to preview the code that I'm doing in the middle, and I've got some notes on the right for some things that I've got prepped ready to work with. The Roll20 instance that we're using here is the sandbox. So I'm using the sandbox tools to update code as I code it, and we're going to be using that to manage the character sheet here. So I've done a little bit of coding already, put a few of the attributes in. I've added a little bit of style since last night's pre-code that I did. So you can see things are a little bit different from where I left them in the last video. What I've got are 4 traits at the top, 4 attributes, and these are going to be the name for the character. Then we have 3 action type attributes, thought, word, and deed. And then I've also coded in already the stress levels, happiness, health, hygiene, freedom, and friendship, which will be used to track damage effectively within the system. So the game that I'm trying to hack is Paranoia. I'm going to try and build that as a workable character sheet, and I'm going to be using the Cortex system to run it with. So I've already planned out which fields I'm going to be doing, which fields in the character sheet we're going to be using, and so far I've done all the name attributes. I've done all of the attribute traits for, as I said before, the action types. I've also gone on and done the stress attributes here. I've got a skill list I need to code up. I need to do the slightly more complicated sections for the distinctions. I also have yeah, I've got more work to do with some hidden fields, and I want to be able to show you what I'm doing to actually produce a character sheet, but also push past that to show you some of the things that I do with dice icons. So there'll be a stage where the character sheet looks really nice and could be something that you would adapt for your own use. And then I'm going to go a step further and overcomplicate my role. Today, I'm not sure. But let's walk through the code and have a look at that for a minute. So what I'm going to do is show you a little bit here of what we've got in the code. We looked at this yesterday in a late night video where I was doing a little bit of an introduction and a sound check. What I've got are I'm going to be using grid layouts for the character sheet. So I'm starting with an individual block div, which I'm going to be using to wrap everything, so I'll call that wrapper. And then I'm going to be using columns to break up content. So straight away, we're going to have 2 columns here. I've commented out this. I'm going to be using portraits later, and I can put those back in while we're playing through the character sheet. But I don't want to complicate it or drop images in straight away. I want to just focus on the fields at first. So within our 2 columns, the first item that we're going to be dropping in is the sheet info block here, and that's where we're holding the attribute name, attribute security clearance, and attribute home sector, and attribute clone. Now I'm going to be looking at adding a new feature for me, something I've not done before. I'm going to try and append all of these into one field, but that's probably way down the line at the end of the project. After that, I've got an attribute block, which is, I said this last night, but for those that won't have watched that, and I don't even know if anyone's watching this yet. In Cortex, you tend to have a prime set of attributes that are prime set of traits that are called attributes or actions. It might end up being roles, it might end up being values, but this is effectively actions or approaches that I'm using here, and I've just rebranded them to maintain a bit of a legacy joke that comes from earlier versions of Paranoia. When filling out a termination form to request permission from the computer to terminate a traitor, you would have to list on the form all the reasons that you feel the traitor is deserving of termination. And within that form, there were 3 that were an in-joke, a tongue-in-cheek joke that refers to something from sort of C of E or Catholic denominations. And that is, you can report somebody as being a traitor for treason by thought, treason by word, or treason by deed. Each of those matches quite neatly with the default core set of mental, social, and physical actions. So I've rebranded that block as thought, word, deed, and these are the primary dice that you would roll as part of your dice pool. So if you're doing a mental type task, thinking things through, solving puzzles, understanding some complex thing, you would use your thought trait. Your word trait is for convincing others, oratory, communication, investigation to some degree. Deed is physical actions, speed of movement, strength of body, and as such, these are the basics that you'll be working with. A second trait set will be the specialties. We'll probably be coding those in today. So after attributes, the next set of traits that I created was stress. So I've set up a style for stress. Anytime you're seeing sheet dash, that's in case I end up facing any legacy issues with Roll20's code validation. Any class that you want Roll20 to leave alone, you have to preempt that by putting sheet dash at the front of the stress name, at the front of the class name. I'm using H tags, headers. At the minute, everything's coming through in the same font size. I'll show you why in a little while. But by using these, I'm getting good formatting for later levels of styling. So treasons is in H1, and stress is in H1, and that's giving me these section names over here in the character sheet. But I'm using H2 for actual trait names. So when I start to style up different levels of header, I'll get different font sizes, different padding, different line heights, etc., and apply those across. So the second set was stress, and I've set up attributes for happiness, health, hygiene, freedom, friendship, and security. And each one of these is an attribute ATTR underscore identifies to Roll20 that this is the name of the attribute. So if we actually switch across here to the character sheet and look at the attributes list, you can see name, security clearance, home sector, clone, thought, word, and deed, name, security clearance, home sector, clone, thought, word, deed, happiness, health, hygiene, freedom, friendship, security. These names have been transferred across because of this ATTR underscore attribute underscore that's in the name of the input field. So that's where we stand at the moment. That's what's in at the minute. But what I thought I'd do, because I've got a little bit further with the styling, I might just focus on that for a minute and show you some of that. So I'm going to switch across to my style sheet. Don't want to go there. Let's bring it into here. Okay, I'll just make it a little bit larger for... Okay, so you can see here that I've set up a style on the asterisk, and that's setting up my font size, and I'm just setting it to a default 1. And then because I'm going to be setting that font size, I want to use that in part as a control for other measurements. The grid gap, for instance, I want everything in my character sheet, let's get it back so it's visible, to have a basic gap size that is relative to that font. So if somebody's scaling their content, if they've got a zoom on or if they've got issues with visibility on their screen, I want it to be accessible to them. So I'm using relative sizes that can be controlled at the user's end, but at the same time, it maintains a ratio within the work I'm doing. So here's the style for that wrapper, the container that holds everything together. I'm going to set a minimum width here of about 550 pixels, and that's just so that whilst I'm working on a smaller screen, it won't, it won't break the layout while I'm going through. So I'm going to be changing that later. And I've set the maximum width to 90%, so that even if I have this character sheet filled out to the full width of the panel that I've got here, the character sheet itself won't fill the whole thing. I'll have a little bit of space around it. Within the wrapper, I want some padding so I don't end up with everything to the edges. I will leave that 25 for now. It'll probably go smaller later. I'm using display grid method to lay things out, so that's why you're seeing everything with these gaps, because I define my gap here, the grid here. I'm getting a grid template and define it by columns. And at the minute, I'm going to just have one column, and it's going to take up one part of the frame. As we go to the next step, and you can see it grayed out here, you'll see some of how that changes. And I want align items to start. So within a block where I have grid elements, I want them all to slide to the top of that block. I don't want to have them at higgledy-piggledy levels within the block. So that's the styling that's applied currently. But I want to, I've got a number of different break points in here. So let me just spread those out a bit to make sure. Okay. So what I've got is pre-coded some of the styles. I'm going to apply them one at a time. So if I do this, that's going to give me all my layout column controls. So 3 column, 2 column, and 1 column layouts. This is going to let me have sub column breakdowns. So I'm going to want my treasons to be 3 columns wide. Regardless of whereabouts they're going to be on the page, I want to have thought, word, and deed alongside each other rather than in one column. And stress, I've got options. I could either go 2 columns of 3 or 3 columns of 2. I think probably I'll go for the same layout as treasons, so I'll have 3 across, 2 down. And if I save this change, you'll notice my Roll20 refreshes. Unfortunately, it doesn't automatically load my change. So we're just going to use the sandbox tool here. So the sandbox tools that come with the Pro set for Roll20. The Pro subscription allows you to use custom character sheets. That's the technology that we're using here. This character sheet I will be testing on the sandbox. Once you actually set up a sandbox, this is what you get access to in your Roll20 game. I'm going to be changing the CSS. And it's that file there. I'll put up the character sheets. This is our character sheet. So you can see. So that's my minimum 550. If I drop that then, so how wide is that panel now? It's bigger than 550. Yeah, but it's the width of the actual content that's causing issues there. Yeah, that's the case. So the next thing to do would be to change the widths of the fields, but we'll come to that in a moment anyway. So I've dropped in my 3 column, 2 column, and 1 column styles. And you can see automatically then that the thought, word, and deed are now adjacent. Happiness, health, hygiene, freedom, friendship, and security. They're adjacent rather than all in one column. And for now, the name has also dropped in because of the styling that I've dropped in on that. So something to consider, I don't want tutorial across 4 lines like that. So I'm going to be looking at that styling as well. But I think because I want to try and find out if I can do some JavaScript at the end of the project, I'm going to try and get those to append into one field. So I'll hide these 4 fields So let's do that. No, let's leave that alone for now. I will not hide those at the minute. Come back to that in a minute. So let's see. So that was adding the layout styles. They're all using display grid. The grid template column here, I've told it to repeat in blocks of 3, and each one should have one ratio of the space available. So that means that if I'd said 5, then it would slice the page up into 5, allowing for the gap that I've decided to keep. Whatever space is remaining is given over. And the same goes for columns 2. I've got grid template columns, and I'm repeating for just 2 instances. And if I want anything in one single column, I've got a columns one. Now that may or may not be required. I'm also considering that I may want to go to a column 4, but last night I had a good look at the settings that I'm going to go for, and I'm not sure that any of the 4s will actually fit what I'm after. A 4-column layout might work if I had, say, 16 skills to display, but at the minute I know that I've got 10. 10 skills would be displayed in the specialties section, just based on the way the character creation occurs. Although I've got, I think it's 15 available, you only get to pick 10 of those. Let's have a look. My music stopped. Playlists. Okay. So the next set of styles that I want to put in is to control the inputs, the actual fields themselves. So if I close that comment, that brings the next block in. So anytime I have a trait that has an input in it of type text, I want to minimize that so that it only has a set width. Currently I only set that to 4 characters wide. I'm going to change the background color, and I'm going to set it so that it's white but completely see-through, so complete transparency, so any color that's behind that will show. And I'm going to remove the border as well. So basically what we'll end up with there is a thin block. Now I know my values for any of the trait inputs are going to be 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, possibly 14, and we'll come to purposes of those numbers later. But those are the only values that should be present in any of those fields. So I know that the width of that only has to be so wide for it to actually allow for those to show, and that's why I'm setting it to 4 characters wide so that we get the amount of space I want. So if I now save that, again, we see the panel to the left reload. So let's see. So this is CSS. I'm going to reload that. And now you can see that I've removed the border, made the fields smaller, and all of them now hold value. Now at this stage, any normal character sheet where it's just number values for trait strengths or anything like that, this is what you're looking for. You want to be able to show the value adjacent to the name of the trait, job done. And as such, we could pretty much run for the rest of the character sheet just like this. And even Cortex could be served like this. I don't need to get fancy and put the dice icons in instead. So if you're looking for simple character sheets with fields and attribute names adjacent to them, this is great. Now I've obviously put the value and then the name. You might want to go in a different order, and we can look at some of those layouts as we go through. For instance, when I'm doing the specialties in a minute, I'm going to be putting the name and then I'm going to put the value underneath. So you'll see some other layouts as we're going through. But this is, let's keep going. Let's keep going with the styles. So yeah, what I want to do next is actually start coding, actually start styling these blocks. And the style that I'm going to be using for those is going to look very computer form, because I want this to be in keeping with the style of Paranoia. So let's close the comment for trait blocks. So we've already mentioned sheet trait here, and then it checks to see any trait that contains an input of type text. It applies this style to it. Well, I now want to actually style the trait box itself. So I'm going to be adding a border. It's going to be about 2 pixels wide, and I'm going to use a just slightly grey, darker grey here. It's going to be a solid border. I'm going to set a border radius of 8 pixels. Now that might change. I might look at setting that to be relative to the character size. But let's just go with 8 pixels for now. You'll see what I'm going for, and then I can always change those later. The background color, I'm going to set as a slightly lighter grey than the border, and I'm going to put a little padding on the inside of these blocks. So if we save this, change, and reload the character sheet. So grab the CSS again. Pull up the character sheet. And there you go. You can see those have been styled now. Interesting breaking. But yeah, so somewhat boring. Dark grey backgrounds, darkish grey backgrounds and borders, but each one is now boxed. Now I'm going to be changing the font sizes maybe on these later on when I start. In fact, I've got some of that in on the next trait. I'd already coded that, so let's activate that next. So here I'm just going to code the H1 and H2 tags. Get rid of that final comment because this is the end of the styling that I did yesterday. So the default font size is 1 EM. And I'm going to change that so the H1s are 50% larger than that, and H2s are, I'm going to say 25% larger than that. So if I save that. Let's have a look and see how that works. That hopefully won't knock the trait names onto the next line, but yeah, you've got to take what we get. Work around any of that. Yeah, there we are. So far, so good. So you'll see that the default font size is adjusted. We've got treasons at a slightly larger size. They are same again for stress, so they've been controlled by the H2 style here. No, sorry, by the H1 style here. And we've got thought, word, deed, happiness, health, hygiene, freedom, friendship, and security at H2, and the font size is just as such. I can make these different, so I can go to 1.75 for titles, make them 75% larger than body text. So we can see what that looks like. And so the H1 and H2 come with their own proprietary styles already applied, so they've got control over their own padding and line height, etc. And I can meddle with those if I want. So what I've got at the minute, fairly happy with. Yeah, I'm happy with that, to be fair. But what I'm also seeing here is that the name is going up at the same time. And that's because each one of those is inside a H1. So I've got a H1 tag surrounding each of these 4 traits. And therefore all of those are being affected at the same time by the each one of those is being affected by the H1 style that I'm applying here. I might want to change that, but already I've said I've got a few things I want to do to the name traits, so that's another thing. That's another thing coming. Okay, I've put this off long enough. I think I need to switch back to the HTML and start coding the specialties. All right, yeah, here we go. So again, I'm going to just make the font size a bit bigger so it's a bit more legible for you guys on Twitch. Check that now. Yeah, that looks okay for me. Okay, so yeah, okay, stop putting it off, Mike. Get on with it. Okay, so I want another new block down here. This is going to be sheet dash specialties. Now I think the advice on Roll20 is to not capitalize. So yeah, let's not do that. I won't. Well, not to capitalize. Yeah, I think the advice on Roll20 is to not capitalize your attribute names. But I'm doing that, so get off my case. I'm going to capitalize them just because in my head, if I want to rename one of these, I want to rename it in both places. So my search will find lowercase and uppercase. In my head, I just want them to be uppercase. If you want to argue with me, put it in the comments, which you can't do because there's nobody watching yet except Joint Effort, who, hi, if you are a real person, give me a nod, let me know. Anyway, so I'm going to be creating sheet specialties. Now I'm using Emmet in my coding here, which is a plugin that lets you just type in the class and then use tab to shortcut a few things. So I can do that now, and that gives me my div with sheet specialties in it. Within that, I will therefore have H1, and that's going to be false. And then we're going to have sheet trait. Now I'm going to just steal the code from up here because even with the shortcuts on Emmet, there's nothing easier than but also that one as well. So I'm going to have three columns. No, I said because I'm going to have 10 of these showing at a time, even though I've got 15 currently. 15 by 3 by 5. Okay, I'm not going to be hiding them yet, so I'm going to make it 3 columns. Go on then. You twisted my arm. So, adding these in. Excuse me while I just do this. So, that's one. And if we close up the 3 column there, and I'll do a reload just so you can see that one in place. It'll help me just to visualize kind of how it's coming through. Okay, so this time I'll in the HTML. And load up the character sheet. There we go. To this point, athletics does not have a value. So take a look in here. Athletics is not on there. So I'm happy to leave that for now, to be fair. I will come back to I'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah? Yeah, I'll come back to that in a minute. We'll start doing actual values on the character sheet later. So I'm just going to copy this out. I need, what did I say, 15 of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need 10 more of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need 5 more of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, I had to think about that a lot more than I should have done. Okay, so athletics, bluff, charm, engineer, guns, intimidate, melee, 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 melee. This word is going to have no meaning for me if I'm not careful. Operate, operate, which is work machinery kind of thing. Program, actually put instructions into computers and make them do things. Red tape, fighting your way through bureaucracy. Science, sector. Now this is sector knowledge, and I may in there. I might call that sector knowledge. Let me go for 2 words on that one. Yeah, because I've got home sector, I've got sector. I might come back and rename that one in there. Stealth, therapy, throw, and wrecking. Now there are going to be other specialties that come in based on your other specialties will come in based on your service group. So basically training packages that you had from being a member of a specific service group. But there are also going to be some secret society skills that I want to code in as well. Why am I typing what I've already typed? Copy paste. So bluff, charm, engineer, guns, firearms. No guns. I'm going to go for guns. Intimidate. Close combat. Operate. Program. Red tape. I'm going to want to put a space in there. And what I'll do is put a no breaking space so that I don't end up with red on one line and tape on the other just for no reason. Science. Science. Sector. Stealth. Therapy. And throw. So, oh no, and wrecking as well. Demolitions. Save that. So what? I should go for. We went for 3 because we said there'd be 3 rows of 5, 5 rows of 3 that way. Nope. HTML. We'll load out HTML on this one. Okay, what did I do wrong? I miscounted. I must have miscounted. Or let's check these through. Athletics, bluff, charm, engineer,